The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and Peter Golenbock is here to introduce, well, actually, Alan Blumkin is here also, but I'm going to have...
Don't forget Alan.
Hey, Alan, keep coming back. Tony, we're the three Baseball Mashuganas, and Tony joins us. Tony Castro, coming back to the fold. It's been a while. You've been a guest before, and we're happy to have you back. We want to talk about your book, and welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you again.
Okay.
Where is it you're living right now, Tone?
I'm still in Los Angeles. I think I'm going to be here for the rest of whatever the good Lord seeks to grace me with. And so this is it. I mean, it's just too expensive to move it's too expensive to live here. It's too expensive to move out of here.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
And same in Northern California, the rents and the mortgage payments are so sky high. But where do you live? Where do you go?
I think it's any different here.
Yeah,
no,
none whatsoever.
And in St. Petersburg, Florida, everything is going way, way up. I think the value of the houses in the last 2 years have gone up something like 33 1/3%. Really something. Yeah.
Yeah. It is incredible.
It is.
The only thing saving people out here is, I think it's called Prop 9, where taxes are grandfathered. So if you bought a house 30 years ago, you're pretty much paying the same taxes as if your house was worth $30,000.
Oh, wow.
Now it's worth $750,000.
It's incredible.
Well, that's certainly good for the old timers. Not so good for the latecomers.
I realize that. And I don't know if that's just in California or if that's
sounds like it.
Wide.
Sounds like it.
Anyway, Tony, tell us how you came to write the book on Gehrig and Ruth.
Gehrig and Ruth. This is like the second time at it. After I did the Mantle book back in 2002, we actually were prepared to do Ruth and Gehrig at that time. A couple of things happened. It makes no difference about it at this point, but it never got done. There was even a dust jacket that was online that from that era, and it led some people to think that there was such a book that maybe had just sold out or something. But this last time around, after my agent had died a couple of years ago, and the new agent that I got, who knows absolutely nothing about baseball, bless her soul, and that's probably for the best, wanted me to send her anything I had, as far as other projects. And I sent her several things. I didn't even bother to look at it. And she called me back and she said, this is something that you really ought to follow up on. Of all the things that you have, this one fascinates me even more than DeMarge and Mick, which she had represented. But she said this one was something that, every kid grows up with Babe Ruth in their mind and hearing about Lou Gehrig. And she had just read that book by somebody's mom, the little boy who thinks he's Lou Gehrig reincarnated. And so she wanted this, and I kind of, started throwing it together. My heart, I hate to say this about this book because it's gotten off to a great start. My heart wasn't in it. And finished it last summer, and like I said, it's good that sometimes when somebody looks at it from outside the box, somebody who's not a sports fan and looks at it and says, okay, wow, this fascinates me, it gives you a different perspective on things, and thanks for her. So that's how this thing came about. The idea originally had been right after Kobe and Shaq had just kind of killed the Lakers fans' hopes for yet another title or two titles or two or three. Who knows how many titles they left in their pockets over their feud. A friend of mine had said, look, Ruth and Gehrig, they were the original Kobe and Shaq. Their inability to get along, who knows how many, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three more world championships there in the 1930s. And so that's what prompted the original idea, although like I said, my heart still wasn't in it back in, say, 2003 and 2004.
Wow.
But it surprised you, the success of it.
Yeah, yes, it has. I mean, it's the people coming together on it. I think Peter and I have had these conversations about a particular publisher that both of us have had, and who had done Damage and Mick, and actually they did a good job on Damage and Mick.
They did.
But it was like it was an exception in compared to other things they did, because that same year I had a Hemingway biography that same company also did. They did absolutely nothing for it. In fact, it's comparable to what they failed to do with Seven. Wasn't that the book that they also did?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Seven had a different history. Seven was fairly controversial because the conservatives of this world didn't like the fact that I was telling the truth about Mickey Mantle. They didn't like that.
Yeah,
were you the first journalist to tell the truth about him? Were the local guys hiding stuff all this time?
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
Yes, I am, Peter.
Well, yeah, and probably for a reason. I mean, Mickey was, so totally beloved, and yet, I certainly loved him as much as anybody else. But I also knew exactly who he was and why he was the way he was. And so, if you're going to, and it's funny because Tony wrote about this in his book with Mantle and Damage. When Mickey was a young kid starting out in New York, he had met this actress by the name of Holly Brooke and totally had fallen in love with her. And she was from New York. She was a dancer. She was very talented. She was going to be an actress. And Mickey also had this girlfriend, Merlin, back in Oklahoma. And when Mickey found out that his father was dying of cancer, one of the things the father said to him, almost on his deathbed, was, "I want you to go home to Oklahoma and marry the local girl." And Mickey, being somebody who would do exactly what his father told him to do, because he had done it his whole life, said, "Yes, sir." And instead of marrying the girl he loved, he went home and he married Merlin. And as a result of that, he spent the rest of his life chasing women. It was totally unfair to Merlin. And so I wrote about all this, and certain conservative members of the media didn't much like it. But I'm still, I must say, very proud of that book. I thought it is the one book that really explains Mickey Mantle better than any other.
Glad you're proud of it.
And what about Jane Levy's Jane Levy's The Last Boy? Have either of you read that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with The Last Boy.
Very nice. Very nice book.
Okay.
I thought the thing about Mantle was he so beloved and so protected by the media, and that's, I mean, I probably would have been right there along with him back in the 50s had I
absolutely
been practicing journalism at that time, and it's understandable. I mean, he was what Jane Levy describes, the last boy, this larger than life figure who kind of
she describes his outrageous sense of humor.
Yeah, he wasn't just a hero. He was like a messiah. He was a Christ. And those of us who refuse to admit that we look upon baseball as a kind of religion for us. He was that figure. And so I think
never refused to admit that it's a religion.
Yeah, when I did his obit at our local SABR meeting, the January after he passed away, I compared him to Achilles.
Very good.
Yeah,
but he was that. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with posters of him and DiMaggio on my walls when I was a little kid, because DiMaggio had been my old man's hero. And so in 1970, when I was right out of Baylor and went to work at the Dallas Times-Herald and working like the late shift, and so I had days to myself, and dawned on me, Mantle lives here. I found his number. I called him up, arranged to meet him, and I was a pretty good golfer. So we wound up playing golf quite a bit, and we hit it off. He loved to gamble, but he also, loved to drink. And for me, it wasn't so much a shock that my childhood hero was this broken down drunk, that I found it funny and amusing, and I guess I went with it, driving him home at times when he was too drunk to drive, dropping him off there, collecting Maryland, and driving back to pick up Mickey's Cadillac and taking it back to him. I think, as I was telling you in the previous appearance here, he was like my old man, because that's exactly what it was like living with my old man, who had a similar drinking problem. But even then, it never occurred to me to shed that light or anything until after Mantle was dying. And then it dawned on me, my God, look at this guy. And especially even now, later, as we see the whole gamut of his life and his personal life, and you see that, here's a guy who cut his career short because of his own selfishness, who made drunkards and alcoholics of his wife and his children. Most of them, the three of the boys have died tragic deaths. The other one, hopefully will live longer. The mom died, unfortunately, an alcoholic. The last conversation I had with Merlin, and I don't know if I was telling one of you guys that I avoided Merlin after my Mantle book came out in 2002, because I had, she had not cooperated with me in writing the book like I thought she would, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I'd become personal friends with Greer Johnson, his girlfriend of the last 10 years. So she had cut this off, and then later I just assumed she didn't like what I had in the book, because I dealt with a lot of, it's subtitled America's Prodigal Son, because I went into a great deal of this, of these things that Peter was talking about, his drinking, his womanizing, how, his relationship with Merlin. At that time, I hadn't met Holly Brooke. I knew about her. It was included in there. I didn't realize the role she played in why Mantle became the way he did. And maybe it took a work of partial fiction. I say partial fiction because I thought some great, I read Peter's book and I kept thinking, I don't know where the fiction is. It's a brilliant book. This is everything I know. And so, Merlin had, in like 2008, had finally gotten to me. My agent at that time said, you got to call her and talk to her and just bite the bullet. But she wanted to call and talk to me about something else that was going on. I don't know why she was asking me this, but she says, do you know about Mallory? That's the granddaughter. I said, no, tell me about this. And so she would tell me this sad story about their granddaughter who had become a broken down, alcohol, I don't know about the alcoholism, broken down drug addict and had been popped. And so here's the Mantle legacy. And so to continue my train of thought on this is, this is our hero. This is our last boy. This is whoever you want to, the Messiah, the Christ of our religion. And this is the guy who, unfaithful, probably, according to some people, got the the liver transplant, jumping ahead of people who deserved it more than he did.
Oh, yeah.
And yet we still love him.
That's
you know? This
I said somebody's going to pay $3 million for a pristine 52 Topps mantle card.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the situation that exists. I mean, this is the guy who
anything with
we
his
can't
picture,
get enough of.
Anything with his picture on it is worth money. You know.
Hey, you ought to see what my office looks like. I've got this.
Yeah.
I've got this life-size picture of Mickey batting left-handed and looking out towards the pitcher. It was at the Trop. They had all these, famous Hall of Fame ball players at the Trop, and then when they fixed up the place, they took them all down, and I was lucky enough to be able to buy it from them. I mean,
I have friends in
fabulous.
Myself included in this, who they wind up down to practically their last dollar, and they really need the money, but the last thing they're going to part with is their mantle collection.
That's right.
And so you hold on to that, and it's it's kind of like holding on to our own sense of immortality, as it were. And there, I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like our perspective on these things. And what has happened with mantle is, remember a few years ago, Rolling Stone had a cover with Jim Morrison on it, and the wording under the head, the Morrison face was, he's sexy, he's this, and whatever, and he's dead. And the same thing with mantle. I mean, it seems like the more removed we are from 1995 and the period of reassessing mantle there, as happened in 97, 98, boom, it's gone on even longer, and you have this sainthood. I mean, if this was the church, he would have been made a saint.
Well, no question about it. And part of that reason, too, is as he was dying, he had that wonderful interview where he said to Bob Costas, I believe it was, I don't want the kids to be like me. And it was the saddest thing.
Yeah.
And he was, this was a heartfelt thing that he was saying. It's like, I really screwed up my life. I don't want you kids to do the same thing.
Yeah, they played that. They played that on the big scoreboard, Yankee Stadium, on Old Timers Day of 1995.
Wow!
Because obviously he couldn't make it.
Yeah. No, right.
So they played that whole, that whole talk. But
one of the things I wanted people to understand in my book 7 is that he was one of the funniest people I ever knew. I mean, those jokes in that book, you get about to the first page, and you could die laughing from the stuff that he used to say.
Yeah.
And his outrageousness when he did kind of show his ass and have to apologize to people, how sarcastic he was by it. Jane Levy's book tells this story of him standing up and being even more outrageous than could have been imagined. I have a question of you both, Peter and Tony. Mm-hmm. Given that Mantle's dad played such a negative effect, a positive effect, obviously, getting him where he was, playing ball with him, this, that, and the other, but such an overwhelmingly negative effect on his emotions, on who he spent the rest of his life with. Was he bitter? Did he ever express anger?
Never.
Okay.
His anger, the odd thing about his father, when his father knew that he was dying, he got in a car and drove out west. You know the way the Indians would walk away and leave the teepee and walk because they would die alone? Mantle's father did that. And Mickey couldn't go with him. The father says, no, I'm going by myself. And he went off, I don't know, stayed in a motel or something and died.
And then,
Mickey
carried
never,
on even after that.
And Mickey, I mean, he loved his father. I mean, it's as abused children often do. he loved this guy.
Right.
But you know,
didn't he have a relative that abused him?
Yes, he did. He did. He absolutely did. You know who told me that? The son. The son told me that. I was going to do a book with the son, with David, and we talked for about 2 hours. He told me these wonderful stories, and then I went back and found the book that David had written the year before. Turned out they were the same stories. So I called him. I said, David, you telling me the same stories that you said it talked about in this book? And David goes, nobody's going to care. I said, whoa, this is not going to work.
See, that's the thing about recycling these things is that I have a friend who's a very good, very successful biographer, Randy Taraborelli.
I love this guy. He wrote Michael Jackson's. I love that
Michael
book.
Jackson, Diana Ross.
Yeah. No, he's
pop culture, and he's gone on to politics now and done the Kennedys. And Randy's theory on this, because he's always saying, he says, do another Mantle book. And it's like, well, we just had a really good one about 6-7 years ago. And he says, screw it. He says, if I didn't have his own set of ideas and that he's doing, he says, I would do a book on Michael every 4 or 5 years. He says, because he says there are certain people, Marilyn, Elvis, Michael, and he gave me 1 or 2 others I forget. I mean, they were show business types. And he says, and in sports, probably Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle. You can't go wrong. People will say, well, so-and-so already wrote that or whatever. So what? It's like all of us will, and he's right. I mean, I don't think there's a Mickey Mantle book out there that I don't have multiple copies of. I mean, my wife will tell you, I'm terrible about.
May I ask you guys, has the ultimate Willie Mays book been written?
Well, the problem is that all of Willie Mays' fans are dead. I guess that's true of Mantle too, but Willie Mays never had. I mean, he was appreciated, but I can't say that he was as beloved as Mantle ever was. The same thing with Duke Snider. I mean, I can't imagine if you wrote a Duke Snider book right now that very many people would buy the thing. And
the only player you could throw into a couple of players you can throw into the category with Ruther Mantle or Ty Cobb and Ted Williams.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's right.
Maybe Henry Aaron.
No.
He wasn't. Aaron wasn't controversial as a person.
No.
Neither was Stan Musial. Yeah.
No, correct. Stan Musial was beloved in St. Louis, but he was beloved for his hitting.
Yeah.
He wasn't beloved necessarily as a person.
And the reason that Lou Gehrig got all the books written about him, of course, was because of the nature of how he got sick and died.
Right.
I mean, Jane Levy is coming out with a book on Babe Ruth that I don't know what she can put out that Robert Kramer didn't put out, 20 years ago.
Well, but Tamborelli had the right idea, which is to say you can never, have too many Babe Ruth books.
Yeah.
And I have seen the photos that Jane is putting in this Ruth book, and it's worth buying just for the damn photos.
Worth the photos, and Jane has a way of spinning stuff. She's a very good writer, and I think that there's never been a sports biography. I may be wrong, but somebody was telling me this the other day. There's never been a sports biography to win a Pulitzer Prize for biography.
Right.
The best.
That's right.
One of the best, this one. I think I've told Jane this. I said, you do it right, and it's going to go a long way. It's her Koufax book. Unfortunately, it was the first of these books that she did because that Koufax book I thought was one of the best biographies I'd ever read. Then the way she did it, the clever way she framed it.
Yes. So, even though Koufax wouldn't deign to talk to her.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about modern biography. It's like I was telling one of these guys who has Ron Kaplan. I was talking to him the other day, pitching the Ruth Gehrig book, and I don't know Ron. I was looking at his one of his pages, and I see a picture of him there as a young man with Sandy, and I said, hey, you with your background, ought to do this. I said, because I'm working on a DiMaggio biography right now, and the perfect DiMaggio biographer was Gay Talie, a guy who, at least at a previous time, and at that time in the 60s, was a guy who was great Italian, probably the best Italian writer we've ever produced.
Well, that magazine article that he wrote was one of the two best magazine articles ever written about a sports figure. Him on DiMaggio and John Updike on Ted Williams on his last at bat.
He was a guest of ours during my Neiman years at Harvard, and we were all, just drunk and talking about everything. And I asked him, why didn't you when's this biography coming out on him? He said he couldn't get DiMaggio to cooperate with him. And I said, well,
right.
You spent a lot of time with him. That's more time than a lot of biographers ever spent with their subject. You're Italian. You have almost identical backgrounds. Have you ever thought about doing this as a book about that in effect brings some of that into you? And so the amount of time that he spent with DiMaggio, which was several weeks and, over and meeting him a number of times over several years, and every time he met him toward the end of it, DiMaggio hated him and would say things to him in public, trying to embarrass him, all of which he could have turned out into, even now could write about. But, it was the amount of time that others have spent with whoever it is, Mantle or Gehrig or Ruth, it's pale compared to that. And so I was telling Kaplan about this. I said, where were you? And he's telling me about this thing that he attended that his, I think it was a Brene Brown group or something had organized. And so we got to meet him. And I said, you spent an evening with the guy. That's more than this great biography of his of a few years ago, the writer there. I said, you share a faith with him. You share a bondage. God, do something with that. I said, because that's living in Los Angeles and being a big Dodger fan, having been a big Koufax fan, and I've got autographs of the yin yang with Koufax and my kids and their gloves and everything that Sandy signed back in like 1994, 1995. And because he's very unselfish with fans. You put some of the photography around him and he's going to just close up. And I said, I've never chosen to do that because I just thought I'm not the right person to write this book. But then again, that goes back to, do you need to have an African-American writer to write about the civil rights movement or a Hispanic to write about, and it isn't. The best, in my early career, I wrote a civil rights book about Hispanic, civil rights, the Hispanic civil rights movement back in the 60s and 70s. And I got my lead on that from a guy named Roy Aarons, who worked for the Washington Post out here in California. To this day, he understood Cesar Chavez better than any of us who happen to share Chavez's heritage. And so that whole thing, I guess I'm countering my argument. But in this particular one, I think when you bring in religion, it becomes an entirely different matter than just ethnicity.
Yeah.
So I think Kaplan, to me, I keep sending him these messages, and he's probably cut me off from his messenger at this point because I keep sending him little ideas on this thing. Like I once had somebody say to me, Castro, what you need to do is reinterpret Whitey's understanding of the Hispanic. That's what this book should be about. And so I said to him, I said, let me tell you this. I'm going to taking that idea, you should reinterpret, the non-Jews understanding of Judaism and Jews in America in this ever-evolving, changing America of ours. And why
Jews don't understand it either, by the way. Jews have a hard time understanding it as well.
I can understand that, but I was telling him about, my kids wound up going to more out here in Beverly Hills, more bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs than first communions, and you'd go to these things, and if the conversation with the parents ever turned to sports and baseball, and I used to coach in the Beverly Hills Little League, which is it was like probably 85-90% Jewish. and you'd get, other coaches talking about Koufax, and their eyes would run. It'd be like, I suppose if you and I, with a couple of drinks started talking about Mantle, we'd be crying, and bawling, and remembering what our childhoods was like. And and so that's I think what made James, that book, so big out here, especially out here.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run on here so long.
No,
like,
quite all right.
Did Jane make an allegation that Sandy might have been gay?
Well, there's always been there's been that talk going back to like the 60s. There was that talk, because he didn't have the world was his, and you had on the other side you had Bo Belinsky, for the Angels, and Belinsky was a woman's man if there ever was one, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And the Playboy, and so you had him
there was
with the Angels. And you have, their stud over there, and you have Koufax here. And Koufax's personal life was seemingly very quiet, but actually he was just a very private person.
A very private. That's like everything that was ever written about DiMaggio back during that time was that he was a shut-in. He ate all his food, all his meals in the room service type of thing. Nothing could have been further from the truth, because one of the things that I found were all these Italian families that were entertaining him back in the, especially during the 40s. And before and after, he went off into service in the late 30s and into the 40s. So he never missed a meal that he, an Italian meal that he could have had, because he was having these in the evenings, the day games. And so, you're free by dinner time. And he never paid for a meal either.
No, he never paid for an engagement ring.
He never paid for anything.
Was gotten to him by a made man there in New York.
Right.
And so, but the journalists of that time didn't know that side of him. They just assumed we don't see him out at the regular stomping grounds and watering holes in New York, so he must be in his room having ordered room service.
It was also a time when journalists didn't report what was going on with guys as they do today.
No.
Yeah.
No. Nobody reported what Babe Ruth was doing. Nobody reported what Mickey was doing either. Nobody.
No, it had to be an open thing, like the thing in the Copacabana.
Yes,
that's where you have cops involved in whatever.
Right.
But
Babe Ruth also has the record for most bad movies made by a ball player at 3. All equally terrible.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, and yet he loved Los
William
Angeles,
Bendix.
Oh God! The first time I saw that one, my jaw dropped almost to the floor from that movie. It was so terrible.
Well, it wasn't worse. It wasn't worse than Fear Strikes Out, when that
it was worse than
throwing
Fear Strikes Out.
elbow down. Tony Perkins was throwing like my Aunt Sally.
Yeah, the only thing good came out of that one was that Hitchcock saw that movie, and because of Perkins' nervous tics, he hired him for Psycho.
Okay.
It's the only good thing that came out of that one.
Well, these movies on Gehrig and the Babe, I started in Hollywood, and I had a couple of people already say, why take him into Hollywood when he never spent much time there? That's not true. When he was sold to the Yankees, he was out here playing golf at this big public golf course that's out here. He loved being out here. He picked up a lot of the actresses. The mother for the daughter that he supposedly adopted in his first marriage, Dorothy. Dorothy later writes that she was actually the biological daughter of Ruth and one of his girlfriends that he met out here in California, a woman named Juanita Jennings. And so Ruth spent a tremendous amount of time here. And when I started, what really got me going on the Gehrig and Ruth book again was a freelance gig that I did for a guy named Johnny Johnny Grant, who was a short little guy who, in his younger days, looked like Mickey. God, what was the name of the Mickey Rooney? And he came to be known as the mayor of Hollywood out here because he came out to Los Angeles. He was a radio guy. He comes out here and he transitions from being in the media to becoming a Mr. Celebrity. He was the guy who put the Hollywood Walk of Fame in place. He thought all of these people should be honored and that they should put these stars on Hollywood Boulevard. So that was Johnny Grant. And Johnny Grant, unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but in 2007 or 8, maybe, I guess it was, he contacted me because we had worked together on some stuff, and he wanted me to help him put together his, retrospective, whatever it was, 50 years of Johnny Grant in Hollywood or something like that.
Right.
And I'm going through all of his pictures, and I see a picture of him with Babe Ruth.
For heaven's sake.
How did this happen? He tells me the story of how he met Babe Ruth, and it was on a set of Pride of the Yankees in 1942. And Johnny had just come out here. He wanted to get into the movies in any capacity at all. So he goes onto the set with a friend to help out on just little, gopher kinds of roles, activities that needed to take place. And Ruth is there, and he described Ruth as having this sweating bullets and just being unhappy on the set as the scene was, scenes were taking place. Mm-hmm. And he overheard that Ruth wanted a drink, and he didn't want water. And he was bellowing, and he was upsetting everyone around. So Johnny goes and gets him, gets some bourbon, puts it in a cup, brings it to Ruth. Ruth says something like, you're my kid, the old Ruth's manner of speaking, and took a shine to him. And he was small compared to Babe, as big as Babe was even at that time. And they became pals. Babe was staying at the Roosevelt Hotel, and at the end of his years, when Johnny moved here, guess where he moved to? He lived for about 40 years at the Roosevelt Hotel. Wow. And he lived in the same suite that Babe Ruth had stayed in. It happened to be the same suite at the Roosevelt Hotel where Marilyn Monroe, about a decade later, was staying when she did some of the early layouts that made her famous, the calendar thing and whatever. It's this cabana out in the back of the hotel that overlooks the pool. Wow. So Johnny's telling me all of these things and telling me about Ruth and how that first night Ruth is going on about how this movie is going to pot, and he's glad that Gehrig wasn't alive to see what they're doing. And Babe's complaining because Babe didn't understand the magic of movie making. And for instance, what was his name who played
Gary Cooper.
Gary Cooper.
Gary Cooper.
Yeah.
Gary Cooper could ride horses, but he couldn't play baseball. To save himself, and he could hit righty. They turned him into a right-handed hitter, and then realized that Gehrig batted left-handed. They couldn't do anything like this, so they came up with this thing of having Gehrig hit right-handed in all the shots they took.
Right.
And then having to reverse all the numbers. Yeah. Reverse everything there. But it meant reversing everything around. He wasn't running to first base. He'd be running to third base. And if he had a runner at first base, he'd be running to second base, going the opposite way. And the Yankee logos that they had on there and everything else, the logos that they had for the opposing teams had to be reversed and then changed back. And
so Ruth didn't know what the hell was going on.
No, and so Johnny was trying to explain
the one
to him,
thing that NY you wouldn't have to mess with, that looks the same in the mirror as it does straight on. But
does it really?
Yeah. No, not quite. The slant between the two vertical poles are different.
Yeah.
It would be reversed.
Okay. That is true.
Continue your story, Tony. Keep going.
Tony doesn't know. Al Blumkin, if there's a fact check in this, Al would be fact-checking the fact-checkers. We wouldn't have had Trump as president. He would have, right then, while the debate was going on, he would have said, bullshit to that, bullshit to this, and here's why, and that would have been it. There would have been no thing. Al, you're amazing. Thank you. But close, and why in the mirror, I don't know. Tony, what is the one thing you found out about the relationship between Gehrig and Ruth that surprised you when you wrote the book? What did you learn?
I think that what surprised me more than anything else was the relationship between Gehrig and the mom, Christina Gehrig.
That's it.
And
absolutely,
she wound up being the consummate stage mom. I mean, makes any other stage mom reminds me of some really horrendous Little League dads that I knew when I coached Little League. I mean, just the take charge person. I mean, somebody who can emasculate the father. None of us ever have known much about the father. In large part, I think he was just an emasculated man. And Gehrig was too. He lived at home until his early 30s. Not unusual nowadays, I suppose, with the economy that we're having and the way things have changed in millennials. But at that time, it was unusual. And so she ruined any of the promising romantic relationships that he had. And he had 2 or 3 of them. And
Eleanor.
Really ruined the one with Eleanor.
His mother used to kiss him on the lips. As an adult, she would kiss him on the lips. I mean, it was bizarre. It was freaking bizarre, that mother. And for Gehrig to get married, he had to do it with the mother not knowing he was doing it. He called up the mayor of New Rochelle and said, "Get over here quick." Now, I don't think Eleanor ever figured out exactly what had happened between Lou and his mother, but something had. And so, the mayor came over and married the 2 of them without the mother and father being at the ceremony. They had to spring it. They had to spring it on him. I mean, there was a point before they got married where she was willing to go back to Chicago because she was being treated so miserably by dear old Ma Gehrig.
So it happened.
She stuck it out with him all those years and dealt with her. How did that come to be that she was able to tame her to at least a certain extent to share Lou? Because he loved Eleanor.
No, I don't know where you got that.
That's not what happened.
I mean,
Lou finally said to Eleanor, "You come first," and she did.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. Oh, okay, and that's what changed the dynamic between Lou and his mother.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it played out even in death, because there was a previous girlfriend that of Lou's that Christina Gehrig broke up that relationship. Later, after I believe it was after Lou had passed away, and there was all this the personal effects, and Eleanor was trying to gather all of these for whatever reason, to get to Cooperstown, to put in a museum, to just take charge of him. She was, after all, the wife and the heir to all of these things.
Right.
Mrs. Christina Gehrig not only refused to give back or to give her some of the things, she did crazy things like she called the ex-girlfriend, who by this time was married, and they had a kid, and she gave them a number of Gehrig's belongings that she had. So much so that here about 10 years ago, the son wound up auctioning off a number of these things, including a game-used uniform of Gehrig's, and I think gloves and other things. And that's how that whole thing came about. The mom was just after the will was all probated.
We all know the word.
What's that?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
About the mom. She was something special in her own way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all moms are, but I think very few moms reach this point. I mean, she was.
I had it in
terror
quotes.
mom.
All moms aren't that way. She was one of the worst, and it's not easy. I'm sure.
Well, it was interesting about Gehrig because he grew up in New York in Upper Manhattan, and he spoke German. He and his parents spoke German. People don't realize it, but Ruth and Gehrig could speak to each other in German, which I always thought was pretty amazing. And this was during a time when the Germans were not particularly liked in America, and they were the Krauts, and Gehrig wasn't treated very well. And as a kid too, he was often by himself. He was a loner. He didn't make friends easily. In fact, the one friend that he had, quite frankly, was his mother. He and his mother used to go to used to go to Rye Playland and ride the rides. He and his mother.
A boy's best friend is his mother.
It was.
That's why I have Psycho.
It was holy smoke.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It was right after Psycho. You got that right. Yeah.
Well, he was known as Columbia Lou.
Columbia Lou, yeah.
All of 1 year.
Yeah.
But it was only 1 year.
Lou.
And Lou had a thing about Columbia that he wasn't all that gung ho about. He had a love-hate relationship with Columbia, largely because of his mom. His mom had worked there.
Right. He worked with his mom.
And he cleaned tables at the cafeteria or whatever, the dorm mess hall.
He belonged to a fraternity, and he picked a fraternity where his mom worked, and he worked as a dishwasher and cleanup crew at that fraternity.
A busboy, yeah.
It was wacky. It was absolutely.
I mean, why do that?
Wacky.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the self-inflicted
was he that
kind of
great a
pain
football player? Could he have been a pro football player?
Well, don't forget,
at that
football
time, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it is hard to tell.
Pro football players were making nothing back then.
Right. Except for the
Red Grange and a couple others.
Red Grange.
Yeah.
Except for Grange, they weren't making very much money at all. But Gehrig, the choices that Gehrig made, really made me, shake my head. It's like he could have gone to any other fraternity except the one that he went to, but he went to the one because I guess because his mother was working there. Very strange.
Well, he had trouble with, had a lot of trouble with authority figures. I mean, the feud part of their relationship is something that began not really with the women's situation, which is what caused the final burst, but it began over contract negotiations. After Gehrig had become someone whose stats were right up there with Ruth's, Ruth's salary was still considerably higher, almost 3 times higher than Gehrig's was at that time.
That's right.
Ruth, though, thought he could get even more and that he could help his pal at the same time if they would join up and negotiate with the Yankees together as a twosome. And kind of like Koufax and Drysdale, I suppose, back in the 60s.
So what happened?
They were set to go on that. Ruth was going to negotiate, or Ruth's guy, what's his name, Christy Walsh, was going to help them out on this. And and the Yankees realized I mean, they could push the buttons that they needed to with Gehrig. They called Gehrig in. Usually contracts were sent out and they were mailed back, agreement. In this instance, they had Gehrig come in and they do the authority figure number on him, get Gehrig to sign for a slight raise over what he had been, but not what Ruth was going to get for him. Ticked Babe off to no end, and it was like, Babe felt he couldn't trust him, and then this built up later to the point where felt that Gehrig was one of the people standing in his way of managing the Yankees. That Gehrig behind his back was killing his opportunities on this.
Both of you guys can confirm this. I read somewhere that when DiMaggio was holding out in 1938, Ed Barrow told DiMaggio what Gehrig was getting paid, and DiMaggio said to Barrow, says he's being severely underpaid.
Yeah, no, I heard that too. Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Gehrig was a guy who. He was a lot like Mantle. Mantle signed, I was rereading a portion of this the other day where Mantle signed his original deal with the Yankees right out of high school at like $1,500.
Yeah, terrible deal.
And in another part of Oklahoma, some other shortstop, because that's what Mantle, of course, was at that time, some other young shortstop right out of high school signed for $50,000. And the same scout that signed Mantle is quoted in that news account that they found out about this in, as saying that the Yankees were willing to go up to $25,000 with this kid, except that they just got outbid. They couldn't go to $50,000.
Well, the thing about Mantle is that Mantle's father, Mutt, who had no experience doing this whatsoever, was involved, and he was perfectly happy to take whatever it was that they offered. So the first offer was like, $500 and a $1,000 bonus or something like that. And Mutt just said, fine, I'll take it. And that's what happened.
But that was universal in baseball. No free agency, no draft.
Some people had a knack of making a lot of money. If you were a smart business type person, you could make a lot more money than the person like Mickey and, some of these other not terribly educated, not terribly savvy, business. They weren't business types at all. Ed Barrow would take advantage of them. Ruth was somebody that Barrow had a real hard time taking advantage of.
Yeah. Weiss had the same thing with Yogi. He couldn't.
Exactly.
He couldn't Buffalo Yogi.
You could not Buffalo Yogi. That's exactly right. But Mickey, you could Buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, Gehrig, you could also. I know. This was a wonderful, wonderful hour. This is the time when Peter says,
"This is fantastic.
This is wonderful. We have to do this again." This is the
Wendy
time when
is
Peter
signaling.
Says, yes, Wendy is signaling that Homeland is on in 2 minutes.
Okay, well, quickly,
let
me make a quick announcement. Our guest, Tony Castro, has agreed to do a podcast on this network about non-sports. It's Tony Castro's America, and it will be forthcoming. So,
sounds wonderful.
Thank you. I'm delighted. I want you to know that, Tony. And I want Alan Blumkin to take whatever hand he has in this and be off back.
Keep me posted because, I like to prove I can talk about other things other than this.
I can't, so that's why I've got you, Al.
There you go. I got you, babe. Right. There we go. Yeah. I can hear it playing in the background. Folks, have a great week. We will talk to you all soon. Take care.
All right. Be well, everybody. See you next week. Thanks again, Tony.
Thank you. Is everybody gone?